vocês aqui no encerramento dessa semana, que foi repleta de aprendizado, vários assuntos muito atuais. Só para lembrar, se vocês perderam alguma das sessões anteriores, vocês ainda conseguem assistir e vocês ainda conseguem se inscrever no link que vai estar no chat para garantir o certificado de participação. Bom, eu vou começar com a minha audiodescrição. Eu me chamo Vanessa, eu sou uma mulher branca, com cabelos pretos e ondulados. Eu estou usando um óculos com armação bege, uma camisa azul, um blazer cinza. Atrás de mim está um fundo branco e vocês conseguem ver uma estante com alguns livros e um pedacinho de um sofá. Bom, só vou lembrar a todos vocês que, como sempre, o chat está aberto para comentários, dúvidas, para interação de vocês. Só vou pedir para que vocês mantenham um diálogo respeitoso e construtivo. Lembrando, eu falei agora há pouco do link de inscrição para vocês conseguirem o certificado. Todo mundo que se inscreveu vai receber uma pesquisa até o final da semana que vem, que vai continuar aberta até o dia 15 de outubro. Vocês respondendo essa pesquisa, vocês vão receber o certificado até o final do mês. Só lembrando da importância de vocês colocarem os dados certinho, o e-mail para receber tudo certo. Então, agora, para começar o nosso último dia de conferência, eu gostaria de agradecer e dar boas-vindas para o nosso palestrante, Graham Stanley. O Graham Stanley, ele é líder de desenvolvimento de professores do British Council, e ele também é editor do livro Remote Teaching, que foi publicado pelo British Council em 2019, autor de Language Learning with Technology, publicado pela Cambridge em 2013. Esse livro, inclusive, ganhou o prêmio Duke of Edinburgh da English Speaking Union, e também é coautor de Digital Play, Computers Game and Language Aims, e ganhou um prêmio do British Council de ELT Innovation Award para desenvolvimento de professores. Então, seja bem-vindo, Graham.
Hello everyone, and thank you for participating in ELT Week. My name is Graham Stanley and I'm the Teacher Development Lead for the British Council based in the UK. Today I'm going to be speaking to you about English language teaching and how you can use the British Council's revised CPD framework for teachers. Here's an overview of what I'll be speaking about. I'll start by talking about the research we commissioned last year, a review of change in the teaching and learning of English and in teacher education and development over the years 2014 to 2024. This research, undertaken by academics at the University of Manchester, Gary Mottram and Susan Dawson, was used to inform the changes we then made to our continuing professional development framework for teachers. Before taking a look at the framework itself, I'll focus on some of the insights from teachers who took part in the surveys that were carried out as part of the research. Then after exploring the framework, I'll finish by pointing you towards some related resources that you can use on the Teaching English website, etc. So let me start with the What's Changed in English Language Teaching report. This report describes the insights gathered during the phased review of the CPD framework for teachers carried out at the end of last year. This extensive review of current trends in English language teaching and English language teacher education was undertaken to identify how English language teaching and English language teacher education have changed over the last 10 years. The full report is available for download from the British Council's Teaching English website, along with the CPD framework itself on the link you can see on the screen. Now, the findings of the What's Changed report were used to revise the CPD framework for teachers. And this was originally created in 2013, and the revision of the framework is part of a more general review of the British Council's approach to continuing professional development, CPD. The framework has been designed to be used by English language teachers and subject teachers who teach English through the medium of English, by teacher educators and ministries of education and other educational stakeholders. And I'll be looking a bit more in detail at this during later in the presentation. But first, let's start with a quiz about some of the findings in the What's Changed report. During the quiz, you can try to guess the answers. And if you are among colleagues, feel free to talk amongst yourselves. And if you're watching this with colleagues or on your own, then please write answers in the chat box if you can see one. So let's start with the words taken from the introduction to the report. At the heart of this report lies a simple but fundamental question. What K, S, B, and A do teachers need now and for the future? Can you guess the missing words that start with K, S, B, and A? So what K, S, B, and A do teachers need now and for the future? And I'll give you a moment longer to guess that. Please suggest the answers to your colleagues if you're with other people, or write answers in the chat. So here are the answers. At the heart of this report lies a simple but fundamental question: what knowledge, skills, behaviours, and attributes do teachers need now and for the future? So knowledge, skills, behaviours, and attributes. And this is what the CPD framework tries to help you identify too: the knowledge, skills, behaviours, and attributes that you need as a teacher. So let's move on to the main body of the report. But before I continue with the quiz, a brief mention about methodology. There are two main parts to this. The first being broad desk research, reviewing articles, blogs, other frameworks, and pre-service training programs for teachers. Then this was followed by an online global survey of teachers and other educational stakeholders in order to sense check the previous findings with a view to understanding if the changes that were identified in the literature reflect the changes in actual classroom practice. This is what was found, and I'll be looking at some of these in more detail in a moment. So what has changed? Well, there has been a broadening of who is teaching English. There has been a broadening of the nature of English language teaching, growth in plurilingual practices, for example, translanguaging, inclusion and diversity continue to grow in importance and are frequently linked to equitable pedagogies, identity, and language. There has been an increasing focus on literacy, for example, multiliteracies, digital literacy, critical literacy. Digital technologies continue to develop rapidly, with generative artificial intelligence, AI, the newest addition, and teacher and learner identity, well-being, and agency are becoming more central. And finally, teacher development and learning is more recognized as being lifelong, and self-development is also growing. So, back to the quiz. I'm going to test your knowledge of ELT acronyms now. There are 3 acronyms in these 2 excerpts from the report, and they're all about a broadening of who is teaching English. So most teachers are NNS of English, and although this term has been criticised, it is still in common use in articles. Although the nest form is still perceived as ideal in many countries and by parents, there is a gradual shift away from this. So NNS and NEST, N-E-S-T, do you know what they stand for? The second quotation from the report: there is an increasing shift in policy to CLT in many contexts, but this is often not practiced in the classroom. CLT, what does that mean? I'll give you a moment longer to make your guesses, put your answers in the chat, or have a discussion with your colleagues. And here we have them. So NNS stands for non-native speakers, and NEST or NEST, native English speaker teachers. And then CLT is communicative language teaching. So most teachers are non-native speakers of English, and although this term has been criticised, it is still in common use in articles. And although the NEST norm, the native English speaking teachers norm, is still perceived as ideal in many countries by parents, there's a gradual shift away from this. There is an increasing shift in policy to communicative language teaching. but this is often not practiced in the classroom. Here is the next set of acronyms, and this is all about broadening of the nature of English language teaching. Do you know these acronyms? There has been a shift away from TESOL, what in the UK we might have called EFL, to EML, EME, EMI, CLIL, and ESP. I move towards English as the language of teaching and learning, not only the subject. Do you know what the answers are to these acronyms? TESOL, EFL, EML, EME, EMI, CLIL, and ESP. What do they mean? I'll give you a moment longer to think about that. Put your answers in the chat or talk with colleagues about the answers. Right, and here they are. So TESOL is the teaching of English to speakers of other languages. EFL is English as a foreign language. EML is English as a modern language, and this is becoming preferred as a way of describing the teaching that we do. EME, EMI, CLIL, and ESP are related, but they're very different. So EME, EMI, English as a medium of education of instruction. That's when English is used as a language, for example, at university, during university courses, and there isn't any real explicit teaching of the language as a language. It's just used in the teaching of the subject, whatever that subject is. Then we have CLIL, and this generally takes place at the school level rather than university level, and it's content and language integrated learning. So some balance, some equal measure between the content and the language instruction. So it allows for both the teaching, for example, of maths and the teaching of English within the same lesson. So English is taught through maths, and maths is taught through English, and there is some discussion about the actual learning and teaching of English during that class. And then we have English for specific purposes. I'm sorry that that my image is obscuring that, but that's what that stands for. ESP is English for specific purposes. Where does that sit on the continuum? Well, that's more of a teaching of English, but with a focus on another subject. So, for example, English for engineers, English for tourism. So you have a focus in the content of the language lesson towards the specific purpose, the specific subject. Okay, now let's look at the Educator survey. There were 1,037 responses from 115 countries. Which of these were the top 3 important topics for teachers today? So which of these did teachers consider to be the top 3 important topics today in teaching, in the teaching of English? Let me go through them. Providing formative feedback, teaching employability skills, being inclusive of all learners, developing global citizenship, behavior management, teaching critical digital literacy, the role of other languages, using critical pedagogies, using real-world scenarios, developing your own technology skills, and using new technology-based pedagogies. Which of these were the top 3 important topics according to the teachers that were surveyed? I'll give you a moment to decide. Again, write the ones you think, or write the most important you think in the chat box, or talk amongst yourselves if you're with other people. What were the top 3 responses? And here we have the answers. So in the Educator survey, it was felt that it's important for teachers to be or know about the following. So 99% of teachers said that it was most important to be inclusive of all learners. So inclusion was the most important aspect of teaching these days. Then we had providing formative feedback, and the third on that list was using new technology-based pedagogies. So not so much about knowing the skills to use technology, but how you can apply the technology to the classroom, which makes a lot of sense, really. And you can see all of those were highly rated. There were others that weren't so highly rated. Now, I'm going to move on to looking at the CPD framework for teachers. What is it? Who is it for? And how can it be used? So the CPD framework for teachers, I'm going to describe in more detail, and we have a little quiz at the end as well. So pay attention, pay careful attention, and you'll do well in the quiz. So here it is. Here's the British Council CPD framework for teachers. You can scan that QR code to access it, or you can go to the website. That's www.teachingenglish.org, and teachingenglish.org.uk, and then /professional-development/teachers, or you can just search British Council CPD framework for teachers and you should find it. So it looks very colourful, it's circular, but what else can I tell you about it? Well, there is a video. I'm not going to play the video now, but I can recommend that you watch the video on that page, which gives you an introduction to it and looks at the aspects of the framework. But let's look at it in more detail now together. What is the framework? Well, the framework describes the skills, knowledge, behaviour and attributes that teachers have or can develop. And the British Council call these professional practices. So an example of this is understanding my context. That's an example of a professional practice. And the framework has 11 interconnected professional practices, which I will look at in more detail very shortly. What about the stages of development? Now, the framework describes development in the professional practices on a 4-point scale, and we call the points on this scale the stages of development. They range from awareness to understanding to engagement to integration. So awareness is when you're aware of a particular professional practice. You've heard of it. Whereas understanding is when you are beginning to use the practice in the classroom. Engagement is when when you're fully engaged in using the practice, and integration when it becomes almost second nature to you as a teacher. Now, why have a framework? Well, I hope you understand why there's a need for a framework, or why a framework can be useful. But we believe that teachers will contribute more effectively to the quality of education of all their learners by developing these professional practices. And we also believe that learning for teachers and for learners is not only a lifelong process, but which is much easier if it's structured in some way using tools such as the framework to help you develop. Who is the framework for? The framework is primarily intended for English language teachers and subject teachers who teach through the medium of English. So although the focus is on English, most professional practices are also relevant to teachers of any subject area. So I keep talking about English language teachers here, but a lot of what is on this framework is relevant to teachers of all subjects. Who is the framework for? The framework can also be used by teacher educators and school leaders when they're supporting teachers, and by ministries of education and other educational stakeholders in the provision of development opportunities for teachers. So anyone who is working with teachers can use the framework to help them decide what to focus on when it comes to developing a program of CPD. Who is the framework for? Well, apart from the teacher educators and school leaders, as I said, Ministry of Education, other educational stakeholders. Now, let's explore the framework in a little bit more detail. So let's look at one of the professional practices, the one circled on the right, and this is understanding my context. Here's a description of understanding my context. All teaching takes place in a certain place at a certain time and is therefore influenced by many factors. This professional practice describes the knowledge, skills, behaviors, and attributes teachers need to be able to understand their context so that teaching is relevant and appropriate. It involves understanding and describing your context at the level of your classroom, so context being your classroom, your school or institution, your community, your region, your education system, your country, and the wider world. So really pretty much all aspects of your context. Understanding and evaluating the appropriacy of educational policies, practices, and resources, and how they impact upon your teaching. So what do things like the national curriculum have to do with your teaching? How does that affect it, etc.? Understanding my context continued. It involves developing an understanding of why people are learning English and learning through English and how that affects how you teach. Developing an understanding of attitudes to English and the role that English plays in relation to other subjects. And understanding the implications of using English as the language of teaching and learning in comparison with learning English as a subject. Identifying and describing the possibilities and limitations for teaching and learning in your context. For example, being creative and innovative with the available resources, identifying possibilities to exercise your own agency and decision-making, identifying opportunities to work with other subject teachers and or English language teachers, and reflecting on your approach to understanding your context and the impact that has on teaching and learning. So when it comes to using the framework, it can be used by different people. As I said, teachers, teacher educators, school leaders, and educational authorities in many ways. And for example, teachers can use it to self-assess their strengths and areas for development. So you can take this and self-assess where you are on the framework, and you can identify learning resources and pathways, or you can use it to help you identify resources and pathways. Teacher educators, for example, can use it to deliver a CPD session or plan a CPD program, inform a teacher observation, or discuss a learning pathway with a mentee. And school leaders can use it to discuss a career or learning journey with an early career teacher, or organize a professional development community or practice for teachers in their school. And then again, educational authorities can also use it to review the standards and descriptions of teacher competence and develop learning materials for teacher development programs. There is a lot more information on our website at teachingenglish.org.uk, including the video and booklet and a wide range of professional development resources mapped against the British Council's framework for teachers. So you can go and after you've had a look at the framework and started to think about how it reflects on your stages of development for the professional practice, you can then find resources that you can use on the actual website above. Now, if you were paying attention when we were looking at the framework, you would have seen the 11 professional practices, and so you should be able to guess the name of the missing professional practice here. K the S. Which one is this? This professional practice is all about subject knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, and the knowledge base for each professional practice, which is fundamental for good teaching. What is it? Knowing the subject, of course. The next one, or the next three, understanding my context, understanding my learners, and understanding and D, my professional I. What are the missing letters? What are the missing words? And there are three professional practices that inform the decisions you make about teaching and learning in relation to where you're working, who you're teaching, and how you see yourself as a teacher now and in the future. What are the missing words? They are, of course, understanding and developing my professional identity. So that's the next group of professional practices. Moving on, what is the name of this missing professional practice? There are 3 professional practices that describe general teaching and learning processes. They are planning lessons and courses, managing the lesson, and learning. Which is the missing word? They. Learning is, of course, assessing learning. So assessing learning is an important professional practice that is included in this group. What's next? Well, what's the name of this missing professional practices? And these are 4 cross-cutting professional practices. So they're grouped together, they cut across all of the other professional practices. What is the first one? Using DT. I bet you can guess that. The next one is using inclusive practices. Then we have using multilingual practices, using 21st century skills or core skills, and we use those 2 terms interchangeably in the British Council. So which is the missing term there? Using DT. It is, of course, using digital technologies. And that brings me to the end of this presentation. I hope you found it of use and of interest.
Todos vocês que fizeram da nossa edição 2025 um evento inesquecível, a semana foi ótima, vocês participaram muito. E só para lembrar, se alguém quiser rever qualquer uma das sessões anteriores, porque não conseguiu acompanhar todas, elas vão continuar disponíveis no YouTube do British Council. E foi um prazer ter todos vocês aqui conosco nessa edição e eu espero ver todos vocês em futuros eventos. Muito obrigada por tudo. Até a próxima.